Assalamualaikum and a very good day to all. We are now in chapter 5 with the title of Modern Portfolio Concepts. Principally, there are 6 learning goals need to be understood for this chapter, which are clearly described in the slides. From the 6 learning goals, however, we essentially have covered the first 4 goals from the last semester subject, which is Financial Management under chapter 9 with the topic of Portfolio Management. With that in mind, I hope by now that you should be able to understand what is portfolio and its purpose. The previous 4 goals that you have learned should enable you to calculate portfolio return, measure portfolio risk using standard deviation and beta, find correlation between two assets and understand the concept of diversification, describe components of risk that includes diversifiable and undiversifiable risk, and finally, be capable of explaining the conceptual and mathematical aspects of capital asset pricing model (CAPM), which involve beta, risk-free, and risk premium components that enables you to plot security market line graphically. So basically, we left with another 2 learning goals to be covered. From these 2 remaining objectives, you will be exposed to 2 different approaches in portfolio management, which are traditional approach and modern portfolio theory. You will also learn on the efficient frontier concept and reconciliation of the traditional and modern approaches. For the revision purposes on the first 4 learning goals, please spare your time to revisit these 2 videos that I've prepared earlier to refresh your memory on all the topics mentioned just now. It will help you to relate to the next topic that we will be discussing. Now, I will begin to explain the differences between the traditional and the modern approach to portfolio management. The traditional approach fundamentally constructs portfolio by combining a large number of securities issued by companies from a broad cross-section of industries, or can be called as inter-industry diversification. Hence, this approach usually emphasizes balancing the portfolio by assembling a wide variety of stocks and bonds. In addition, the selection of companies in a portfolio construction following traditional approach will tend to focus on well-known companies, which investors normally perceive as less risky companies. Stocks that are more liquid and available is another common reason why the company is selected to be incorporated in a portfolio. And last but not least, familiarity factor also plays a vital role in the company selection process for a portfolio construction under the traditional approach because it provides higher comfort levels for investors. Modern portfolio theory, MPT, on the other hand, uses several basic statistical measures to construct or develop a portfolio plan. Harry Markowitz pioneered this theory in his paper Portfolio Selection, which was published in the Journal of Finance in 1952. He was later awarded a Nobel Prize for his work on modern portfolio theory. According to MPT, the maximum benefits of diversification occur when investors can find securities that are relatively uncorrelated and put those securities together in a portfolio. Therefore, we can understand that portfolio form using MPT principles estimate the average returns, standard deviations, and correlations among many combinations of investments to find an optimal portfolio. In other words, MPT is a theory on how investors can construct a portfolio that provides the highest return for a given level of risk, taking into consideration the correlation between the securities involved. And this is what we call as an efficient portfolio. Referring to the graph, the efficient frontier is the point where all efficient portfolio dominated are the plotted portfolios with each risk and return combination on the same graph. The efficient frontier represented by the upward sloping part of the shaded area whereby portfolio B, Y, O, Z and C provide the highest return at each risk level compared to other portfolios. Nevertheless, by holding portfolio O, the investor is better off than he or she would be holding portfolio Y or Z, although both portfolios also lie on the efficient frontier. You can see at point O, the investor's indifference curve is tangent to the efficient frontier. That is why portfolio O is an optimal portfolio that represents the highest level of satisfaction the investor can achieve given the available set of portfolios. Okay, to shift our attention to a more practical aspect of the efficient frontier and its application, I will later share with you a video on how to construct or build efficient frontier in Excel by using real data. So, I have selected two stocks listed in Bursa Malaysia from two different industries. The first stock is from Syarikat Takaful Malaysia Berhad and the other one is from Axiata Group Berhad. I extracted the historical price from here, historical data, using monthly data from the January 2019 to January 2020 for both companies from investing.com, and we are going to use this data set for our workings. So you can choose here and determine the period that you wish to extract. Now, going back to the modern portfolio theory, after you have made all the security analysis needed for security selection, you finally chose these two stocks to be considered for your portfolio. Okay, and let's say you have a capital of 2,000 ringgit to be invested in these two stocks. Okay, so next you have to determine how much will you invest in Syarikat Takaful and how much will you invest in Axiata. So this is to find the weight or proportion of your capital investment in each of this stock. Other than that, you also need to find all the main measures like mean return, standard deviation as a proxy for risk, as well as correlation between these two stocks. So, let me start with finding the percentage return for both stocks, as well as other measures to reflect the characteristic of Takaful and Axiata companies. Can find by inserting the formula. It's just like measuring the holding period return. Okay, divide with the previous price minus 1. And same goes for Axiata. We take 2 decimal points, okay? Then we can proceed to calculate the mean, standard deviation, and also variance, as well as correlation. Okay, to find mean, you can use average. And variance. The standard deviation. As well as the correlation between these two stocks. Okay, now from this output here, okay, you can now select either one of the stock that you prefer to invest based on the risk and return characteristic. Okay, where you can see here the mean return for Takaful is 1.23% with the standard deviation of 10.87%. Likewise, Axiata has 0.85% mean return with 7.32% standard deviation. So far, we can conclude here that both stocks are quite volatile, okay, by looking at the dispersion of each data point here, okay, in relative to its mean. So that's why it reflects, okay, the high standard deviation figure for both stocks. The correlation, on the other hand, is negative correlation, okay, but the figure indicates a very low negative correlation because it is far from -1 or 1. Okay, having said that, you can also decide to invest in both of the stocks, okay, Takaful and as well as Axiata. And if you invest in both, you can build a portfolio. But like I said earlier, how can you decide the best possible combination between these two stocks? Okay, so in order for you To evaluate alternative portfolio by selecting the best possible combination of return and risk, we can try this by creating hypothetical sets of portfolio. Okay, let's build some possible combination here. This is for Takaful. So let's say we start with 0 in Takaful and full investment in Axiata. And let's say the second portfolio we increase by 10%. Okay, and for Axiata, okay, and we call this as portfolio 1 until portfolio 11. So we also have to find the return for the portfolio as well as standard deviation for each of these portfolio. Okay, do you still remember how to calculate portfolio return and portfolio standard deviation? Okay, let us start with the first portfolio. Your weight time with the mean for Takaful. Plus with the weight for Axiata times with the mean return for Axiata. Okay, let me freeze the mean here so that easier for you to drag the formula. Okay, now you have to find the portfolio standard deviation for each of these portfolios. Okay, this is the formula for portfolio standard deviation in case you forget. So we follow one by one. Okay, the weight times with the standard deviation for takaful, power of 2, plus with standard deviation for Axiata, and then plus with 2 times the weight for takaful times weight for Axiata times the correlation times with the standard deviation for both. And take the square root of 0.5 to the power of 0.5. Okay, shall we look at this? Or this one. Okay. So to drag down, you better make sure that you freeze the standard deviation as well as the correlation. This is the weight, okay. Okay. Right. So now you already get all the portfolio return and also portfolio standard deviation for each of these portfolio combination of weight, different combination of weight. Okay. So from all the portfolio you have created here, we can now plot each return and risk combination on a graph and find the efficient frontier. Okay, insert, and we choose this plot. and we have to determine, okay, what will be the x-axis and the y-axis. So the x-axis should be the standard deviation or the risk measure, and y is the portfolio return. Okay, you can insert the label here, add data label. Okay, and let's say you want to have labels on the standard deviation, so you can click here and change. Okay, you want the value of x instead of y on the efficient frontier. Right. So remember that an efficient frontier is a portfolio that provides the highest return for a given level of risk. Okay, so from this graph, this upward sloping part here represent all the efficient portfolios that provide the highest return at each risk level, and this boundary here is what we call as an efficient frontier. So if let's say you want to have a portfolio with a level of risk that is less than 6.5%, example. Okay, so from the graph, you have several options to choose the portfolio with risk level less than 6.5. Okay, so if you notice here, there are 4 possible portfolios. Okay, where this point 6.1, 5.87, 5.95, and also 6.33. Okay, there are 4 possible portfolio. So now, what will be the best way to select? Okay, one of the way that you can do is to determine the risk-adjusted return, or commonly known as Sharpe ratio, for each of the portfolio, and then you compare between them. Okay, so for simplicity, we ignore the risk-free rate, okay, in this example, and we just calculate Sharpe ratio based on portfolio return and also portfolio standard deviation. Okay, now we can calculate for these 4 portfolios, because these 4 points, the risk falls lesser than 6.5%. Okay, Sharpe ratio. so basically this is the point. Okay, let me just highlight here. So the formula for Sharpe ratio is return, portfolio return, divide with portfolio risk. Okay. And we shall change the format here because it is not in a percentage form. Okay. We don't read Sharpe ratio in a percentage form. Okay. So we change the format here. So a portfolio with the highest value of Sharpe ratio is basically preferable, right? Because it indicates the highest average return earned per unit of volatility or total risk compared to other portfolio. So in this case, the highest Sharpe ratio is portfolio 5, okay, with 0.17 return with a 1 unit of risk. Okay, portfolio 5 here. So this implies that the best combination for these two stocks is at the level of 40% for Takaful and also 60% for you to invest in Axiata in order for you to get the highest Sharpe ratio in this example. Okay, as a final note, okay, please remember that risk and reward must always be evaluated together when considering investment choices, because this is the focal point presented in modern portfolio theory. And the Sharpe ratio can help you to determine the investment choice that will deliver the highest return while considering level of risk. Before we end this chapter, let us recall on the two approaches of portfolio management. By now, you should understand that the traditional approach stresses security selection and emphasizes diversification of the portfolio across industry lines, whereas the modern portfolio stresses reducing correlations between securities within the portfolio to minimize diversifiable risk. So, the question now, which technique should we use, the traditional or the modern approaches? Well, basically there is no definite answer to this. The question must be resolved by the judgment of each investor. However, it is recommended for investors to use the mixture of elements and aspects that are useful from both approaches. These are among the best practices for portfolio management policy when we reconcile from both traditional and modern approaches. The first one is to determine how much risk you are willing to bear as an investor. Number two, seek diversification between different types of securities and industry lines. Then, you also need to pay attention to correlation of return between securities selected. Next, use beta to keep your portfolio at acceptable level of risk. And finally, evaluate alternative portfolios to select highest return for the given level of acceptable risk. Okay, that's all for chapter 5. Thank you for your time and Assalamualaikum.